Good evening, everybody. I think that was actually the best intro to a talk I've ever had. That was quite amazing. Thank you. I don't know where. There, over there. Wow. Yeah, I'm not a guru. That's one thing I want to say. I'm not a guru. But I would like to start off with something that that we had before. Like I saw some of you raised your hands when the question was asked, did you ever meditate? And I'm gonna top that up a little bit. I'm gonna ask you, do you actually have a regular practice of training your mind, of maybe meditation, maybe also something else? And let's say regular meaning once a year. So who has that? So that's a few hands. So how about once a month? Whose hands stay open? Okay, pretty much the same number. And once a week? At least once a week? Yeah. Okay, so we have a bunch of people who actually practice quite regularly and others who don't, which is perfectly fine. And my prediction is that in around 15 years or 20 years, way more hands will go up, because my guess is that doing something like mindfulness or like doing something like training your mind will become as popular as, like, today you say, well, I'm going to the gym or I'm going for a run or something like that. And I'm going to talk a bit about why I think that this is the case. So I like to start off my talk with actually telling a bit of a story about myself. And the story starts when I was around 15 years old. And when I was 15, I had a bit of what today would be called a nerdy childhood. So I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. I had a home computer. I had some, of course, male friends that did the same. And one of those friends was actually a bit of a weird guy who also made sure that I always got some weird books. So he had a source of, getting some weird books and giving them to me in order to read them. And he gave me books about consciousness, about the mind, about meditation. And back then I learned many things from the books, but the two things that are important are, one thing I learned was that whatever you do, the mind is involved in every experience you have. It's quite obvious. So if you win the lottery, or if your relationship breaks up, your mind can be your best friend in that situation, or it can be your worst enemy. And the second thing I learned, or that's what these books said, is you can actually train your mind. You can train it to be more kind of skillful, useful in those situations. So I was pretty intrigued by that. 15 years old, I was like, hey, you can, play with your mind and do stuff, and it sounded really interesting. So I started to meditate, and I did that for probably 6 weeks, and then I stopped. So not very successful. So why did I stop? I stopped because the instructions weren't actually really very clear. So the book said things about, what you could do, but somehow it wasn't really described in a way that I actually knew what I was doing. And also my bit more critical mind set in and said, well, this all sounds a bit esoteric, and some of that language in those books was really strange, and I was like, yeah, I don't really know if that really makes sense, so let's just drop it. So, and I did that for actually many, many years. So fast forward in that story to around 6 years ago, 6.5. 6.5 years ago, I was self-employed for my first full year. So first full year of self-employment as an agile coach. And actually the first year was quite successful. Actually, it went much better than I expected it to be. But I also noticed that I felt quite stressed. I had a bit of problems starting with getting to sleep, falling asleep, and thought, well, maybe it's time to kind of look into that. So I used the Christmas break to kind of research what can I do around that. So how can I deal better with stress? And I came across meditation again, because meditation is actually a quite well researched way of, preventing and treating burnout, preventing and treating depression and stress. So, you know, I looked at that and read more and more around it, and I realized lots of stuff had happened in those kind of, you know, a bit less than 30 years between my first encounter with meditation and the second one. And what has happened is that one thing is that science really had started to examine meditation. So there was a lot of scientific research going on into meditation in those 25 years. And the second thing that has happened, partly because, you know, science was so looking at meditation, the second thing that had happened is that the teachers were way more clear in their instructions, because they kind of translated it from a more maybe Eastern-oriented language into a Western-oriented language, and also into a language that was scientifically more, you know, precise, and, you know, you could repeat things and you had clear instructions and so on. So I said, well, that sounds great, let's start again. So I did all kinds of stuff. One is, for example, the Search Inside Yourself trainer, and got into meditation, and have been meditating since then. And tonight I want to tell you a bit about that, how that works, why I think it's really useful, also more about what has changed for me. So let's look into that. So what are we going to do? I'm going to talk a bit about what mindfulness actually is. There are several definitions around that, and I'm going to show you one. We're going to do a little practice, so that's an invitation that you will get later. I'm going to talk a bit about the science, and then we close up. Fair enough? I see some nods. Okay, great. So what's mindfulness about? Or actually, let's start with what's meditation actually about. So I'm quite sure that when you hear the word meditation, many of you will have thoughts of, you know, sitting cross-legged and your knees hurt or something, or, you know, wearing orange robes or incense and, you know, stuff like that. And of course, that's all true. Of course, you know, it's all connected to the history of meditation. But it's actually not really the core, or not really necessary to do those things in order to meditate. What the word actually means is simply practice. So originally it means, like the literal translation is something like cultivation of the soil, of the ground. So meditation is a practice you do to cultivate the ground so that things can grow. So in a bit more, you know, fluid translation, it's something like you practice. So meditation is actually nothing else than, you know, going to the gym, but instead of doing it for your body, you do it for your mind. Simply practice. A way of practicing your mind. That's all there is. So I'm going to take out all the, you know, whatever pictures you have in your mind about meditation. It simply means that. So what's mindfulness? I'm going to spend a few more minutes on talking about mindfulness. And I'm going to do it in a specific kind of way. First, I'm going to present you, or I'm going to talk about 3 skills of mindfulness. So it's a kind of a skill-based definition of mindfulness. Yeah? And what I will also do is I will define the skill, and so you get a definition, and I will also give you a technical analogy, because, you know, we have most of us, I guess, has a technical background. So who's like a software developer or has developed software? Yeah, it's like 3/4 or something. Okay. Like it was said, I also used to develop software. I'm not really doing it anymore. So I'm going to give you a technical analogy. Why is that? Well, first, it's kind of course, adapt to the audience. But also it makes a lot of sense, because when you speak to the people who meditate for a really long time, they actually say things that they say something like, well, I'm doing this in order to really understand the functioning of my mind from the inside out. And that's pretty much like what we do with computers. So like, you know, a software developer or a hacker, someone who really understands how this thing works. And kind of develops ways or a language to tinker with it or to change its behavior. And that's what these guys are doing, the people who meditate for a really, really long time. So we're going to use a technical analogy to explain in another way what that skill is. And of course, the third thing is looking at what is it good for, how is it helpful in your life? And since I'm an agile coach, I also talk a little bit about how is it helpful if you work in an agile way. So what are the 3 skills of mindfulness? Let's start with the first one. The first skill you develop when you train mindfulness is usually, one of the first skills is concentration. And concentration is defined as the capacity to focus on whatever you find important right now. So whatever is important for you right now, that's what you focus on. Yeah, and to actually have the skill to stay with that and to, in a way, decide and then stick with it. And I'm pretty sure all of you know states of high concentration. Like, to give you an example, imagine you get into your office and you are one of those software developers. You get into your office and you sit down on your computer and you have a really interesting task to develop, and then you get into it and you start and you work and you work and you work and work. And suddenly you realize it's lunchtime. Yeah? And you had these amazing days where in those time from we started to work and it was lunch, nobody disturbed you. Yeah, it's one of those really lucky days. Yeah, that's a state of high concentration you had in those 3-4 hours there. Because time passed by really quickly, and when you kind of looked up and looked at the clock and you said, well, I'm hungry, I need something to eat. And you also think, wow, I was so productive. Yeah? It's a state of high flow, high concentration. Yeah? That's what you can do if you can really get into high concentration. So what's a technical analogy? So like I said, if we think of our brain as like a software that is running inside and we can maybe tinker with it, what's the equivalent of concentration? Well, I would say equivalent of concentration is the capacity of my software development environment to set a breakpoint. So for the kind of non-technical people, a breakpoint means I can stop the running program at whatever point I choose to, in order to then look at it and understand what's going on. That's a breakpoint. Yeah, I can break and then continue. So why is that like a good analogy? Because there is what concentration also gives you is the skill to increase the pause or the time between a stimulus and a response. So let me give you an example. Let's say I just pick you. Let's say Angelo is your name. Angelo. Let's say Angelo just yawned. Yeah, he didn't do it, so it's okay. But let's say for the sake of the argument, let's say I just saw him yawning. So what might happen in me when I just saw him yawning is a lot of stuff can happen. I might think, oh, he's yawning. Oh, he must be really tired. Maybe he's tired because he's actually bored. Maybe I'm boring. Maybe I'm really not good at my job. Oh, it reminds me of the situation last week. Someone also yawned there. So maybe I'm really not good in this job. Maybe I should, drop this and do something else completely. Yeah? So I really slowed it down now, but oftentimes these kind of things happen really, really quickly within oneself. Yeah? And concentration gives me this skill to kind of enter in this moment where, there's yawning, that's fact, that's the truth, yeah? And then having a pause before all these automatic things happen that I bring with me because of some kind of conditioning, because of some kind of fears, of being scared, whatever. Yeah? Whatever the reason for that is. Yeah? So Viktor Frankl calls it, there's a space, a pause between stimulus and response. And within this pause, there lies our freedom. So if I can increase this pause or this space, I can be more free. And we saw that in those feedbacks that you saw before. Yeah? Someone said, well, I have more spaciousness to react when I'm, something unpleasant happens or something. Yeah? So and that's kind of part of where concentration really helps me. And that's why I'm also saying it's like setting a breakpoint. So, what's this good for? Well, I mean, obviously, if you can focus like that, if you can enter a state of high concentration much more easily, much more voluntarily like you can now, this is a hugely powerful skill in the way we work. Imagine you can just, focus on something and stay focused, even though your mind might be wanting to go somewhere else. Yeah. So attention is in this world right now, and especially in the kind of work we do, is our most precious resource. And I would even also top that in a world where we have an attention economy and where lots of companies are very skilled in manipulating our attention, or getting our attention to places where they want it to be instead of where I want it to be. I would actually call this as an act of self-defense. Okay, concentration. So that's the first skill you're developing when you do meditation. What's the second? Second is clarity. Clarity actually means to experience the present moment, well, with more clarity, and with a more technical term, it's experience the present moment with an increased resolution and lower latency. So that's for the technical people. Right? So it actually means that I can, experience sensations, with, I don't really have another way of saying it, but with more clarity, so in more detail, both time-wise, but also resolution-wise. A very good example that I really remember is I'm actually, my eyes aren't perfect since 20, so I'm actually wearing contact lenses now. So, but when I was 20, I got my first pair of glasses. And I still remember this moment. I was sitting at this optician office, or whatever you call that. And, I had this, newly produced pair of glasses, and the person handed it to me, and I put it on my face, and I remember I looked out of the window, and there was a big tree out of the window, and I was like, wow, that tree actually has little leaves. I didn't see that before. It was just, a nice green tree before, but I didn't really see leaves, and now I could actually see like the, specific little leaves at the tree. Yeah? So that's like increasing resolution. And this skill becomes really interesting because it's not just about like seeing or hearing or something. You can also use that skill inwards, towards yourself and towards what's going on. So I can increase kind of the clarity with how I perceive what's going on in me. So in that example with the yawning, so Angelo yawned, I can actually perceive this train of thought that I just talked about. He's yawning, he's bored, I'm boring, da 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 da. So clarity is really the skill to notice these little things. And that gives me a lot of insight about what drives me, where my fears are, and what is actually really going on. Yeah. Because what's really going on is he's yawning, and the rest of all that stuff is going on inside of me and has basically only to do something with my past and nothing with him. So I can be again more free in how I want to react and smarter in how I want to react. So that's clarity. So what's the equivalent? If we're thinking of a software engineering, software programming environment, and we have a debugger and we can set breakpoints. Of course, reading variables and states of objects would be the equivalent. So I can look into, you know, what the state of my program is, or what the state of my objects are, whatever programming language or metaphor you use, and analyze what's going on. And for daily life, I already said, it helps me to act smarter on what I experience. You know? It helps me to decouple. There's someone yawning and there's some stuff going on in me, and I realize, oh, yeah, that's I noticed that stuff. I know that, and it has been happened before, so it has something to do with me, and so on and so on. I can again be more free and smarter on how I act. So that's the second one. What's the third one? Third one is equanimity. In German, Gelassenheit would probably be the best translation. Gelassenheit. So what's equanimity? My teacher, who's also a very geeky guy, he loves math. He's like a full-time meditation teacher, but he just loves math. So he sometimes explains things with formulas. Yeah? So he says equanimity has to do with this formula. It has to do with the resistance, and it's actually the opposite of resistance. Equanimity is the opposite of resistance. So, and what's resistance, and why is it interesting to look at resistance? So he has this formula. He says suffering is discomfort times resistance. So what does that mean? It's actually a mathematical expression of an old Buddhist insight, basically, into life. And what the Buddhist insight is that whenever you're alive, there will be some discomfort. Yeah. I might hit my toe, I might lose something, a friend of mine might die, at some point I will die. So life is, you know, as long as we are alive, there's discomfort. There's no way around that. It's part of life, it's part of the deal. But what we usually do is we add, or we actually multiply that discomfort. And in the old Buddhist teachings, there's a way of expressing that. They say that, well, in life you sometimes get hit by an arrow. That arrow is discomfort. You know? So you get hit by an arrow, and that just happens. You know, you walk through life, someone shoots an arrow at you, bam. That's okay. You know? So the thing we do often is, you know, I get hit by an arrow, I actually take out a second arrow, you know, I pull it up into the sky, and I shoot it again, and it falls back down, and I shoot myself again because I got hit by that first arrow. You know? So that are those things that we are doing, like, well, I see him yawning, sorry about that. I see him yawning, and, you know, I have all these thoughts, and then I think, oh, I'm really not a good trainer. You know, I'm really not a good presenter. No, it's like I should have, whatever, practiced more. And it's like, you know, like judging myself, you know, or even judging the world. No, he's really like a very unfriendly guy, and, you know, should know how to behave and so on. Why is the world so bad, and people and everybody? You know? So that's the second arrow. So we cannot avoid the first one. Well, there's no way. It's part of life. But we can work on the second one. So if I would meet every experience with perfect equanimity, you know, I'm far from doing that. I don't know if that's possible. But then I would never shoot a second arrow. Yeah. So I can actually avoid suffering. Yeah. I cannot avoid discomfort, but I can avoid suffering by not adding to it. Yeah. And probably some of you know or have some experience where you actually at some point realize that the discomfort wasn't that big, but what you added to it really made you suffer. So that's a very mathematical expression of equanimity. So the technical analogy would be something like refactoring code, actually. So refactoring code so that it runs more smoothly or is easier to understand, so that things just get easier. Yeah? You use less resources, you know, it goes faster, whatever. And in real life, I mean, you already get some ideas from what I said already, but I find equanimity is also a very good thing to look at in terms of an agile coach, because when I work with a team and they want to become more agile, usually that means that they approach uncertainty in a different way, and that they are invited to change more. They want to look at how they work, and then they want to run experiments and change a little bit, change their process or change something about their product. And intellectually, many people get that. Yeah, it's they think about agile and they read about it and they say, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we kind of let's not pretend we know. Let's find out. Let's do an experiment. Or yeah, of course, let's run an experiment, change our process, and see if we can deliver more value. And then they still don't do it. So why is that? Well, my guess it's partly because uncertainty and changing again and again is something unpleasant. It's like meeting uncertainty, saying, I don't really know. I have no clue. With colleagues, that also, have some status thing. I want to seem competent by him. So it's hard to stand there and say, I don't really know. Let's find out. Or we change something, and again, I have to relearn something. Again, I'm the beginner. I'm for 10 years in this company, and I'm proud of how I know my stuff. And now we want to change something. That's not pleasant. Yeah? So we need equanimity to deal with this kind of unpleasant sensations that are triggered by, in this way, in this situation, by our idea to work in an agile way. So, and if we can have more equanimity with that, it actually becomes easier. Okay. 3 skills of mindfulness. Questions about that? Cool. Then let's practice. Okay. So, first I actually would like you to get up for a moment. So that's not meditation. Also. Just get up because you have been sitting for like more than a half an hour. It's always good to just get up. Give yourself like a short stretch. Really just, treat your body well, give it what it needs, and then, whatever, shoulders, neck, perfect. Okay, and then sit down again or keep standing. So, the good thing about meditation is you can do it in all kinds of postures. Sitting is kind of the standard, and I would also recommend doing that when you begin, but you can also do it standing. So what I would like to do is I would like to guide a little meditation for maybe a good 10 minutes or something. And of course, it's very important that this is an invitation. So you probably didn't read the abstract enough to notice that I said I will do this, so that's perfectly fine. So if you don't want to go along, that's okay. So just do whatever you want to do. That's perfectly fine. My only request would be not to jump up and make loud noises or whatever. So just keep it to yourself. But you don't have to follow or anything. It's really meditation only works if you do it motivated by yourself. Okay, so let's start. And for starting, I would recommend that if you're sitting, that you put both feet on the floor, and that you actually find a sitting position where you can sit relaxed and alert at the same time. So you want to have it as relaxed as possible, but without kind of dropping to the ground or falling asleep. So stay alert at the same time. And a good way to do that is actually if you lengthen your spine, really lengthen it, sit straight, and then relax everything from that kind of lengthening, everything that you don't need to sit in that way. And I also invite you to close your eyes. If you're uncomfortable doing that, it's also okay. You can keep your eyes open and just find a spot, maybe 1 meter or 2 meters in front of you, and let your eyes rest there. And then start by taking 3 deep breaths in your own pace. And actually really allow yourself to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And you can even make sounds with that. And again, notice if you can relax something in the way you sit or in the way you stand. And if you notice something is tense, relax it, let it go. And if you notice that you can't relax it, then you can practice equanimity and just let it be there. And next I invite you to notice the sensations of breathing in your body. So just notice what you can notice, all sensations that are happening while you breathe in and while you breathe out. And then I invite you to actually notice the sensations of breathing in and breathing out, the tip of your nose. Notice how the air flows in at the tip of your nose. That sensation or those sensations that you have there. The sensations that you have at the tip of your nose when you pause between in-breath and out-breath. The sensations you have while breathing out. And the sensation or the absence of sensation in that pause between out-breath and in-breath. And for this meditation, this is our focus object. So focus object is the sensations of the breath at the tip of my nose. So just bring your attention there. Let it rest. And when you notice you are somewhere else with your attention, maybe with some other body sensations, or with some thoughts about the food you just had, or what you want to do when you get back home, just let that be, and let that move into the background, and bring your attention simply back to the sensations of the breath at the tip of your nose. And bring some curiosity to your breath. Really try to experience every little sensation that you have. How many different sensations are there breathing in? How many are there breathing out? And yes, maybe thoughts come up, or maybe emotions or emotional reactions like irritation or restlessness. The practice is again and again to return with your attention to the sensations of the breath at the tip of your nose. That's the practice. Whenever we return like one exercise in the gym. Whenever we return, we train the muscle of our attention. So just notice right now, how are you? Just get a sense of yourself. How are you? What's going on? Notice if there's anything pleasant present in you. Any pleasant experience. Notice if you take anything from this meditation right now that is useful or pleasant. And if that's the case, you can take it with you even when we soon end the meditation. It doesn't need to end just because we say stop the meditation. You can take it with you. Just notice for a moment, how are you? Take with you. And then in your own pace, within the next 15 to 30 seconds, just come back with your attention in the room. Open your eyes. Maybe give yourself a stretch. Just in your own pace. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that trust. I like to hear one report. How was that, and what actually did happen for you? Let's hear one report. Yeah. Oh.
It was surprisingly difficult.
Yeah.
What? The mind is wandering. Part of that was you telling like examples what we could think of, and of course I was thinking of that, exactly that, of the good food, for example, moments ago, etc. And I found myself wandering within just 2-3 seconds. No, refocus the nose. And for the first time in my life, I noticed that even at this room temperature, the room that I breathe in is cold.
Yeah. Great.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very common what you described, that once you do that, you actually realize how fast your mind is in going there and going there and going there and going there. So it was also for me when I started to meditate, this realization that you often say that I have this idea I'm in control of my mind. That's mostly not true. Actually, I have lots of stuff that works like totally automatic in ways, going there, thinking about that, and it's no, I didn't decide that I wanted that. So it's really interesting, and that's actually the practice. That is the practice. So training that, and training this muscle of attention, saying come back, and do it kindly. And that's also important. And it's important to do this, with an attitude of, oh, okay, now I'm back. So give yourself, like sometimes say, give yourself internally a pat on your shoulder. Oh yeah, I'm back. Now I focus. And then, a few seconds later, I think about the food, and then I realize, in that moment, I say to myself, okay, great, I'm back. Because this positive reinforcement trains kind of the subconscious to come back again and again and more often. So don't force it, but be persistent. Okay, great. Let's continue. Perfect. Okay, so that was the practice. I want to talk a bit about the science around that. And like I said in the beginning, one of the things that really has changed in the last 25 years is that science started to look at meditation. And I would say this has happened for two reasons. One is because kind of some parts of the Buddhist and meditation community really opened up to science. And that's actually something that the Dalai Lama I heard once say was that the Dalai Lama something said like, I really want science to examine what we are doing, and if science finds out something that is in contradiction to our teachings, we need to change our teachings. And I find that for like a religious leader or whatever, quite a statement. So there was actually, like in probably starting 1995, a lot of people working together. A lot of scientists started to examine long-term meditators. And the other thing that happened was actually a technological change. Like for around 30 years now, we actually have new technology, and that's imaging machines, so magnetic resonance imaging and functional magnetic resonance imaging. So technologies with and using these technologies, we can examine a brain while it's still in a functioning body. Before that, we had to cut the brain open, and then you can't really see what is changing over time anymore. So that is really a huge technological change, and that's part of why also the whole field of neuroscience, of course, is like having a big, it's not a hype, but a lot of people are getting into that, and people were thinking about how can we apply this to meditation. And you can see that effect in a little bit of statistics I did. I actually looked at research on mindfulness in a pretty large American research database, PubMed. So basically all medical or medical related articles are referenced there. And I just did a search for how many articles are in a given year period with the term mindfulness in the title. So like, what is it, good 20 years ago, it was like in a 4-year period, it was like 38 or 34 articles. And like in the last 4-year period I looked at, it was like 3,000 and a few. So you can see that we are actually learning a massive amount right now about how mindfulness actually works and what is happening there. So what, can't really look at 3,000 papers. So what are some examples? So I picked out some examples for you. What are the effects of meditation? So meditation, quite a few studies show or look at how does meditation affect intelligence and memory. And there are quite a few studies. I always pick out one study. So that, for example, there's one study that looks at scores in college admission tests. So what they do is they give students who want to get into a US-American college, they give them some mindfulness training, but actually not that much. They have like, I think, 10 hours of mindfulness over a period of 14 days. So it's like 10 hours, it's not that much. And they have like, I think, a 13 or 15% increase in the scores on these standardized college admission tests. So that's one thing, intelligence and memory. But the other thing that's also interesting, actually mindfulness also really changes things in the body. So there are measurable changes in body chemistry that you can have from also actually not that much mindfulness practice. So that's a study where they say less stress, less sense of stress, and less inflammation markers. It's a study that they actually did even with the control group. So they had a weekend of mindfulness training for one group and a weekend of relaxation training for another group. So, and in the end of the weekend, they asked both groups, so how do you feel? Both groups said, well, I'm feeling really relaxed right now. So it's all good. So, but they also did some tests after a couple of months. And after a couple of months, only the meditation group still felt some effect, self-reported. But they also did some blood tests. And they realized that certain inflammation markers in the blood are in a much lower concentration than the people who did the mindfulness. So there are effects on body chemistry when you do that. That's also really interesting. And what I also find interesting is there are actually measurable effects on the brain. This is, in general, it's no surprise, because one thing we know for these, from this research from the last 30 years is that the brain also actually adapts to how it is used. So for like 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, people thought an adult brain is pretty much fixed and stable, doesn't really change anymore. Yeah? But because of the magnetic resonance imaging and other technologies, we could actually look at certain brain changes that come from a certain way of using the brain. So if you are a taxi driver and you navigate a lot in your head, a certain area in your brain becomes larger over time. This is not something that happens within a week, but over years. Yeah? If you're juggling, certain parts of your brain becomes bigger. Yeah? And that's the same with meditation. Certain parts become bigger and other parts become even smaller. That's usually something that you don't have after 2 weeks. It takes more like maybe a few years of practice, but then you can see measurable brain changes. So what's actually happening there? What's an example there? Well, one example where the brain changes when you do a lot of meditation is in the amygdala. The amygdala it's kind of a small structure, maybe this size, like a small hazelnut, a bit smaller. It's kind of in the middle of the brain. So on both sides, you have two amygdalas actually. And the amygdala is kind of it's a very old part of the brain. Also, mammals also have that. And it's kind of the flight or fight center. Yeah. So it's kind of a part of the brain that scans the environment for threats. And if there's a saber-toothed tiger, crawling around the corner, I react. I either fight or I run away. I get adrenaline and so on. That's all. Amygdala has a big part in that reaction. So the unfortunate thing today is that my amygdala also gets triggered in different situations. So there are way less saber-toothed tigers, but there are, for example, way more bosses. Bosses can also kind of act like, if my boss comes into my office and has something's going on, I see, look at him. I'm self-employed, I don't have a boss. But, well, I used to have a male boss before, so he had like a red face, and I was like, so it's the same reaction. Sometimes this, fight or flight response is actually not really very useful anymore. I can show you how that looks like, how a fight or flight response looks like in a cat. That works. So what you see is the cat, and here are two cucumbers. Some people know that. Yes. So that's, I don't really know, but it's probably a amygdala response of the cat. So you're all relaxed, really, eating your food, and then you suddenly realize something that looks like a snake behind you, and you just jump. So what are long-term meditators doing with that? What's going on for them? So actually, they have tested these things also on long-term meditators, not with cucumbers, but what they do there is they, you get hooked up to stress measurements, things, and what they do then is they fire a starter pistol behind the back of the person who's examined. So one of these pistols that they use to start a race, for example. So, and of course, they don't tell them before. So, and what you see is that they actually have a pretty much initially the same stress response. So something like stress going up really high, for everybody. But what is happening then for the people who do long-term meditation is that it drops down again really fast. So they look around, they realize, okay, nothing has happened, that's all good. And then kind of the stress goes down really fast. For people who don't meditate, or especially who don't meditate for that long, it's more like, really taking quite some time. And that's also where stress becomes really harmful over time. If you have like a situation goes up and then it goes slowly down again, and then already the next new thing happens, and then and you never get to your baseline of whatever relaxedness or not being in a stressful situation. That's where kind of stress is really not healthy. So, and you can do that with meditation, and kind of the reaction they show, kind of the how fast they go back down, is actually pretty good correlated to how small their amygdala is. And so with meditation, you can actually decrease the size of the amygdala, and that's quite amazing because, like I said, the amygdala is like a really old structure. It's not something that we developed in the last few 100,000 years. It's way older. And you can influence that with meditation. So, getting to the end here. So, I want to close by saying, why am I actually doing this? Because when I thought about, when I was preparing this talk, and I thought about, yes, that's all interesting in the science and but why am I really doing this? What is really important for me? And I realized, for me, like two things come up why I find this really interesting and why I meditate for like 4 years pretty much daily right now. The one thing is actually this, I mentioned this, the word hacking has appeared several times in the presentation, and it's actually this kind of hacking mindset. It's also because I like software development. I like to play around with things and find out how it works, and and I really find the idea that I can do that with my mind, and realizing that my mind is involved in everything what I do, I find that really fascinating. So it has this, idea of curiosity and also this idea of power. Like, how can I use that? How can I work better and be a better person when I do that? And the other thing, I haven't really talked that much about that, but most meditation teachers say the goal of mindfulness is to become, in a deep way, more happy. Not in a superficial way, in a deep way, more happy. And there's actually a way to measure that. So one of those long-term meditators that they have examined was Mathieu Ricard. Mathieu Ricard is a French guy, and he had, I think, a degree in in some kind of biology. Molecular biology, that's what it is. So he had a PhD in that from a very good French university. And then he decided to skip his scientific career and become a Buddhist monk. And he did that and went to Tibet and meditated for 30 years. And he was one of those Buddhist monks who were sent back to the US to be examined, because it was very useful. He knew the language, he knew kind of the scientific approach and everything. So he was a natural choice. He's probably, my guess, the best examined monk of the world. He was also coined the happiest man in the world, which is always very funny. He's not very happy about. So why was he named the happiest man in the world? Because they did some experiment with him. You can actually, in a certain way, measure the base level of happiness of a person, and it has to do with the activation in one side of the prefrontal cortex compared to the other side of the prefrontal cortex. And if that's really going in one direction, it's a good indication for happiness. If it's really going in the other direction, it's a good indication for depression, and yeah, mostly for depression. So, and they did that with him, and the researchers really said, well, we did something wrong. This, the measurements don't work, because he was way off the charts, by a factor of like 1,000 or something. It was way off the charts. So they did it again and realized, no, it's not a measurement error, it's what's happening. And Richie Davidson, who is the neuroscientific researcher who did this research, he describes it in a following way. Imagine you have an elephant running towards you, full speed. And imagine the intensity of emotion you feel then, if you have that situation. And imagine you have that intensity in terms of joy and happiness. And imagine you can enter into that state within 2 or 3 seconds. This is what someone like Mathieu Ricard can do. And I find that very inspiring. I have a little, 1-year-old son, probably this size. And I really like to be more happy. I really like every moment where I'm in kind of this state of deep happiness instead of, sometimes being grumpy or whatever. Because then I'm just a more pleasant person to be with, a pleasant person to help him grow up and become a taller bee. So that's why I like to do it. Thank you very much. So we have a few more minutes for questions. Yes.
Do you fall asleep while meditating? I know it sounds stupid, but
well, I would then say I stopped meditating, but no. Of course, sometimes I meditate and I'm really tired, and then it's always interesting to have that decision-making process of, do I stop and just go to sleep, or do I actually try to be with those sensations of falling asleep, because that's also an interesting object of meditation. So yes, of course that happens. It's actually very common that in the beginning, when you meditate, you get to a point where often kind of when your mind starts to become quiet, and then also you have your eyes closed, like everything in your body tells you, oh, it's sleeping time. So that's actually another obstacle to, in a way, to overcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So for me, meditation, after your speech now, I think very controversial, because you're saying that we meditate, you meditate, companies, people, to relax more. But at the same time, you need 1-2 years to reach this aim, this big aim that you are gaining to. And this thing, all this process of meditation is super exhausting. So how could it be so that you are, while working day, so you're, let's say I'm concentrating for 3 hours. People say that not more than 3 hours can be concentrated. Never mind. And then I want to rid of my stress. Yes, I'm go and meditate, and it's only my, let's say, second month. And I already so exhausted of it. So it makes me really stressy. So it's I don't know. I tried to meditate and it took me like 1 week only because it was so not exhausted, but it pissed me out because it's like it may look like I'm sitting with closed eyes, but in my head it's like Second World War because no, really, it's also what happened today while we was practicing. So, and my question is how I can get this relaxation while such an exhausting process as meditation.
Okay. Couple of things. Well, how to start? So I wouldn't really say that, you know, for me the goal of meditation is not relaxation. And I also wouldn't say like you need to have like 2 years and then you can, you know, balance this or whatever. So actually what I would recommend on a practical way is like really find a way for you to, if you want to try it, really find a way to do it as relaxed as possible. And we heard, you said in the beginning you were quite surprised that sometimes it's actually not relaxing and you kind of, you're at the end of the meditation and you're more, you know, more tired than in the beginning. Yes, and that can happen sometimes. But when you're in a situation like you described, actually focusing on relaxation is actually the right thing to do, the important thing to do. So you want to be at least most of the time get out of a meditation in a more relaxed state, so that it is nourishing for you. It's not about like pushing through for a year and then you know, and then I'm gonna reap the benefits. It's not going to work. So today we did like, you know, focusing on the breath, and that's a technique that is, it's kind of, it emphasizes the concentration part of meditation. The other parts are in there, but it's kind of, it's a concentration practice. But there are also other kinds of practices that are more relaxing. And you can also do breath meditation in a very relaxed way. So really just find a good place to sit, relax as much as possible, and then, you know, just practice, train your mind. And yes, you have all these things going on, and that's completely normal. The brain is made to have thoughts, so it's not going to stop. Meditation is not about an empty brain. It's not about, you know, making your thoughts stop. It's about training your attention to where you want to put it. And so it's more about relaxing den Anspruch. Relaxing the expectation about meditation also. So yeah, you have lots of thoughts, you have tons of thoughts, like you said, Second World War. And the practice is, you know, bring it back to your breath. And it might be useful, that's why I also, time's too short for that here, but that's why I also find it useful to have a set of practices. It might be useful in your situation to do something that has more flavor of relaxation, for example. Because then you will be naturally, you know, drawn to do it. So no idea to, you know, don't push yourself for another year. Because we do that with so many other things anyway. If it's just another thing you have on your to-do list and you need to do, it's probably not be as beneficial as it could be. Okay.
It's just so hard to understand how to reach something without pushing yourself. So you, again, like you push yourself not to think about these thoughts and to concentrate. So it's like not something that I do want to reach, or I just really want to obtain this this knowledge. I mean, how to really focus on some things, because that's actually my problem when I have very many blackouts, and it's really disturbing while concentrating. Yes, and that sounds like a good option. Also, yeah, it's also kind of work. I mean, can't say that it's just Spaß, yes. So it's, you also need to work hard to understand then at some point the profits. So, but okay, that just was very, really very exciting to hear all these approaches, and then obtain skills that you may have if you will succeed. So that, thank you a lot for your presentation in general.
Okay, thank you. There was someone there.
Thanks for the presentation. Just wonder about something that you have mentioned regarding the happiest man in the world. It's pretty a marketing thing, because I think we haven't reached it so far to have a scale who is the happiest and who is not the happiest, or something like that. Because I was wondering, like, there are many things regarding science, neuropresentation, and software development with some analogy for meditation and stuff. It's pretty interesting, but I still feel like there is something maybe need to be highlighted a bit, like regarding how meditation could fit in someone's life. Because you mentioned that Buddha monk is like the most happiest people or something like that, and I think like every person can find the way to meditate by his own or her own self, how they can feel. So it's different approach, different practices. So yeah, it was just like those two things that maybe you could clarify a bit more regarding them.
Can you phrase it as a question? I'm not really sure if I'm getting
so,
what
so the first one was regarding the happiest man in the world. How is this like something that's really like...
No, that's not scientific. It's just, it came from, and that's why I also said that he is not very happy about it. It came from this, they published a paper and said, well, what we measured is way off what we have ever measured with this kind of, you know, the way we measured happiness before. And then some journalist made this headline of, oh, here we have the happiest man in the world. So that's basically the story around that. So no, he's not, people, they have not compared people on a happiness scale or something. So no, they haven't done that. Okay. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, do you also see some dangers on this mainstream adoption of mindfulness? Because, as you mentioned, it could help you to survive in an unhealthy environment, but you're still in an unhealthy environment.
Yeah.
So your stress level is reduced, but you get still the same amount of stress.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's always a point then when companies adopt that, like Google did, it develops a search inside yourself, and for example SAP, they also have a big program of adopting mindfulness, and there's always a discussion within those companies. And I personally think, yes, we need to look at both. I find mindfulness for me as a personal practice extremely helpful. And as an agile coach, I definitely want to work with kind of the structure and the processes, because it's so much is determined by that. And I mean, we know this rule from I don't remember his name, but he basically says if you throw like a really good person into a really crappy process, that person will fail 99% of the time. So yeah, we need to look at both. Yeah. Is it still alive? Oh. Still alive.
If I want to get started with meditation and preferably guided meditation, what would you say is a good starting point? Is there any app you could recommend? And if I would like to somehow do it without using a phone, so let's assume in the morning I don't want to use my phone, so what other ways would you recommend to get started with meditation?
Well, first I have a list of, so if you follow this link up there are probably some recommendations that you can find. There are a couple of really good apps. There isn't that much in German that I know of, but if you speak English, it's kind of perfectly fine. I personally like Budify. It's a bit less American and less gamified. So it's from a British company, a British guy, and that guy has also written a really good book that I also like. So that's an app. And if you don't want to use your phone, well, it depends on, I mean, you can find guided meditations to download and then listen to it in another way, or you just get up, find a spot to sit, put on your timer and sit for 10 minutes, and you do what we did today. Focus on your breath. It's a perfect starting practice. Okay.
Okay. I practice meditation for some years already.
Okay.
And I would not say that is a danger in it. It's just the opposite, because you realize when you get stressed and you stop things. So it defends stress. So you become aware of getting stressed, and you have the ability to switch out because you realize. So I think for me personally, I reduced stress because I realized much earlier that I'm stressed.
When you need to.
I have to get out of it and start meditation or just defend myself.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay. Ready?
Yeah. All right. If there are no more questions, thank you very much, Markus, for your very inspiring talk here today. Well, round of applause, obviously.
Thank you.